Welcome to another episode of Pairing Pro Con. In this episode, we're going over pairings for Nevsky. First, we have Joan Prime. Nevsky Joan has great burst damage with the double cast on Joan's skill, good mobility, and a great debuff to help you burst down singular enemies while also supporting your allies with the rage buff Joan gives. However, due to the fact that Joan doesn't have a lot of tanky skills, this is generally swarmable and a little fragile. Next, we have William. Similarly, William has great level support and good burst damage with the extra passive damage. It is a great free-to-play friendly option since you only need him to be 5551, potentially saving you 310 gold heads. However, it is definitely very swarmable and fragile, and it is hard to land AoE consistently. Last, but certainly not least, we have Woe, who has insane 1v1 damage output when paired with Nevsky, and does great in that 1v1 regard. It has decent sustain with the heal, but is extremely fragile and swarmable. It is not good in AoE. Welcome to another episode of Commander Versus. In this episode, we have a battle of the white damage garrisons, with Gorgo squaring off against Zenobia. First, we have Gorgo. Gorgo has insane damage output on her primary skill, with smite damage bonuses and increased normal attack damage dealt with her passives, making her great both 1v1 and against Swarm. And since there are very few major counters to normal attack damage in the field rally meta, it leaves her more or less unimpeded to do a ton of damage and wreak havoc on anybody unfortunate enough to swarm her. Next, we have Zenobia. While Gorgo resists Swarm by putting out a ton of damage, Zenobia does so by being insanely tanky and having a bunch of health and heals on top of significant damage reductions to make most damage pretty much ineffective against her. As with every episode of Commander Versus, there can only be one winner, and although Zenobia does fight valiantly, Gorgo gets the edge. But both of them together make an insane combination that I think everyone should at least try. Welcome to another Museum Relic review. In this episode, we have Mulan and Alexander. First, we have Mulan, who gets a 20% bonus to health and a 15% skill damage reduction in terms of skill damage taken. This works fairly well with Mulan's setup as a secondary commander buffer, adding additional tankiness and further extending her ability to support by staying alive as an off-main support march, giving her an A- based on the fit to the commander and how it can help bonus support marches to do better. Next, we have Alexander, who gets a 10% infantry defense and a 3% normal attack damage taken reduction with no tier 2 level. While this is not quite what is needed to return him to the front of the support meta, the survivability is nothing I will turn my nose up to, and when used as a secondary commander, it gives a free bonus survivability to your buff march and keeps him very relevant with his damage taken debuff on his primary skill, earning a high B+ for this relic. Welcome to another episode of Pairing Pro Con. In this episode, we're going for pairings with Scipio. First, we have Alexander. Scipio Alexander is a great bridge pairing option for players who are just starting into Season of Conquest. It has top tier debuffs, decent survivability, but can be fragile in large field fights and is very easily swarmable, and does not have the greatest mobility once you begin being focused. Next, we have Guan, who has the benefit of insane damage output when paired with Scipio Prime, and a double AoE with solid mobility, but is also fairly swarmable due to the fact that they don't have a ton of tanky stats within Guan. Last, but certainly not least, we have the new Liu Che, who has great solid damage output with a double AoE again, and great tankiness, but has some conflicting damage sources which can be somewhat hard to optimize and gear, and you may have some trouble in that regard with your talent selection. Welcome to another episode of Commander Versus. In this episode, we have a battle of the infantry defenses, with Gorgo squaring off against Flavius. First, we have Gorgo, with insane damage output on her primary skill, passive bonuses to primary skill, normal, and counterattack damage, as well as a reduced skill damage taken buff and some health. You have a moderately tanky garrison with a serious amount of damage output. Next, we have Flavius. Similarly, Flavius likes to resist Swarm through insane damage output, but instead with counterattack damage buffs, general damage buffs, and a stacking poison debuff, boosting infantry damage to the target, alongside some of the best garrison talent tree availability in the game. The longer you fight Flavius, the more and more it will hurt. However, only one commander can come out on top, and in a close match we have Gorgo taking home the win. Although, like with Zenobia, the two of them can be combined for a devastating result on enemy rally. Welcome to another episode of Museum Relic Review. In this episode, we're reviewing Caesar and Frederick. First, we have Caesar. Caesar gets a 20% damage boost and a 20% march speed bonus at tier 2, And while this would be an excellent relic for most commanders, Caesar suffers from not having a significant damage factor on any of his skills. Even with expertise, a 400 damage factor just does not do anything in the meta, making any sort of damage output difficult to get, even with the 20% bonus damage, and even with this relic. Netting this relic a space C. Good stats, just does not help an already very weak commander. Next, we have Frederick, who gets a 40% attack bonus and 15% skill damage taken reduction at tier 2. Similarly, this just doesn't do a lot for a commander who's already on weak footing and has no real survivability, where he could have used a damage reduction or a defense or health bonus, netting a low C- overall. So a frequent question I get on the channel is whether to tackle Iconic Tier 1 on all pieces first, or to max out a single item piece by piece to a full set, and then work on another one with your Iconic levels. In today's video, we'll cover both sides of the argument. First, in favor of Iconic Level 1 on everything, the biggest boost you get with Iconic tiers happen at Tier 1 and 5. However, Iconic Tier 5 requires 5 separate tier unlocks, which is 5 different crystals. So the argument goes, for those in favor of everything Iconic, that it makes more sense to Iconic everything to Tier 1 first because it grants a higher value per Iconic crystal invested. This method also saves the equipment material investment and blueprints for players who are still building up their equipment. The alternative argument is to optimize your best march, whether to rally or garrison, as strong as possible to optimize the trade, which is also valid reasoning for those who need that. Either way, you will have to make the assessment you feel is right for your playstyle, whether that be optimizing or generalizing. Here are the best slots to get Iconic in first for your garrison sets. Since each equip slot has the same basic bonus structure for Iconics, here are the slots you should max first for your garrisons. First is the weapon slot, which gives you a 10% chance to snag a 5 to 6.5% damage boost for 2 seconds, which is a mini swarm deterrence and a mini ring to even out your garrison trades against rallies and other enemies. Or if you want a better 1v1 against rally, you can instead use the Helm Iconic here. Next, we have the chest piece. The chest piece gives counterattack damage, which is huge for garrisons to resist swarm, and a potential 40% uptime on a 5% counterattack boost when swarmed is not earth-shattering, but it's enough to help those really heavy swarm trades even out. Last, but not least, are accessories. Accessories have potentially the craziest boost in the game, and are only really held back by the fact that the blueprints are scarce, and that you can't necessarily select which one you get, and it's randomized. Leadership garrison pairs are becoming increasingly popular. With Hera YSS and now with Lapulapu, even more players are talking about leadership garrisons. But are they worth building? First, in favor. Leadership garrisons can be tanky, while also being extremely flexible on units, meaning you don't run your kingdom out of a specific unit type too early in the fighting, and allow you to fill much easier and quickly, but to keep the garrison topped off and effective. Add on insane damage and huge AoEs on all 3 of the main leadership commanders, and you have great, flexible, deadly pairings. Next, for the cons, you have the sheer specialization of leadership garrisons. To be truly flexible, you need max leadership gear and armaments that have very specific unit stats, as well as having a tough time getting an optimized setup to be fully effective, meaning you'll likely leave some stat on the table in the process. But ultimately, leadership garrisons provide a powerful, free-to-play friendly kingdom option to help defend objectives, so ultimately, the choice is yours. Here are some do's and don'ts of gem spending. First, do line up your gem spending with more than gems in it. If you're going to spend them anyway, might as well get as much value as you can. And the results are great, especially while the frequency is enough that you have plenty of time to build back up and hit another 7,000 tier and some more gold heads. Next, don't let gems burn a hole in your pocket. They're a precious resource, so using them sparingly gives you more efficiency and can mean the difference of months between milestones reached. Lastly, do take every opportunity to earn gems that you can. Arc, Chronicles, Occupation rewards, these are all free rewards for doing things that you would do already, so make the most of them. Make sure to have as many players in the alliance as possible when you complete them to maximize kingdom gems. As a bonus, you can use spare spaces for farm accounts for kingdom buffs. Here are the 3 best civilizations to get the biggest head start when beginning from day 1 for each troop type. First, for infantry, we have China. With the increased upgrade speed and buildings and access to the best epic commander in the game in Sun Tzu at day 1, you are set up quickly for success in the early game and can get your buildings up quicker, leading to more resources and less stoppage on account of resources and building levels. Next, we have Egypt for archers, with a solid archer commander at day 1 and a great balance of both research and build speeds to help your research and buildings reach new heights faster, as even the small boost is significant over the term of your development. Last but certainly not least, we have Germany for cavalry. While you do not get an epic cav commander on day 1, you get a solid T4 unit, increased training speed for more units earlier, and increased AP generation to help you get more barbarians hunted, more speed ups gained, and more resources gained through this process. Welcome to another episode of Museum Relic Review. In this episode, we're going over Constantine and Tomyris. First, we have Constantine. Constantine gets a 20% bonus to attack and a 5% bonus to normal damage with no tier 2 relic. While this isn't groundbreaking, the bonus to normal attack damage and attack help boost damage output for his pairing with Gorgo, making him even stronger in a sneaky good Garrison pair, and earning an A- overall to help push him into the Garrison meta years after his release. And likely an A to A+ when he gets a second relic tier. Next we have Tomyris, who gets 15% health and 10% march speed, and with no tier 2 relic as well. The health is nice and a need for Tomyris, and the march speed is also a must-have to fill gaps in her kit. However, the stat level is just not enough to bring her to the forefront of relevance, and this relic gets a B-, which could become a B+ or A- with a tier 2 level.